A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing. It's one important thing. It's one important thing.
Welcome to the Morning Hedgehog podcast, where we explore the business ideas that shape your success. Here are your hosts, Gardner and Glynns.
How does
All
my
right,
video look?
we are officially recording. Welcome to the Morning Hedgehog podcast, where we're going to be talking about the key ideas that can help photographers be successful in their business. And my name's Gardner, your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Glynns. And to begin with, let's just get to know each other a little bit. This is actually our first opportunity to collaborate together. So can we start out with you, Glynns, talking about some of your professional background?
Sure. Thank you for that introduction. So currently I'm a photographer that specializes in headshots and brand marketing photography. But prior to that, I have worked for some of the world's greatest advertising agencies on numerous different accounts. And then I went over to client side, and I was a vice president of internet marketing at Wells Fargo Bank. And for the last 10 years, I've been teaching a class online to emerging small businesses called Small Business Marketing on a Shoestring. So that's my background.
Nice. And in fact, the way I first met you was through a marketing webinar that you did through the Professional Photographers of America. And I just really enjoyed the concepts you were talking about, saw a lot of synergy, and then looked at your website and I'm like, yep, this is somebody that's got a really strong focus and a strong business approach to it. So that was great. My background is I've been blessed to be a professional photographer since 1989. I was 19 years old when I started working full-time professionally for myself. And it was really interesting. About 3 years ago, I came across a journal I had written back in 1989 that actually listed 3 life goals. And my first goal was to build a successful business. And the second goal was to become influential in my industry. And I wanted to help others be successful. And then my third goal, which was really cool at the time, was to start teaching private workshops. And I came across this document while I was getting ready to do my first private workshop with a client that was coming over to my studio to do some work. And so it's been a lot of fun working in this career. And I've managed to achieve all the goals that I set out when I was 19. And now I'm looking at what can I do to give back more. And so I've been blessed to have had an amazing career filled with some really amazing mentors. And my business started out in a one-room studio apartment. It was a basement studio apartment with a Murphy bed that I had to fold up out of the way. There was no parking for customers. And somehow I was scraping by and making a modest living. And then I took a workshop from Charles Lewis over in Seattle, and I'm in Spokane, Washington. So I drove over there. And this is back in 1991. And I remember going to his business workshop and a week later putting into some of those concepts into practice and booking my first $2,000 job. And the business grew from there. I moved into a larger space. I had 10-foot ceilings and a track lighting system, and then eventually grew it into a retail portrait studio with multiple employees. And I was so fascinated with how the business skills made all the difference in my business success that I really got focused on workflow and business processes. And I ended up developing a business management software for photography studios that was used all over the country. I had clients all over the country. Bruce Hudson was one of my spokesperson. I got to meet Bruce because he ended up using the software for a lot of years. And that was just gave me an insight into a lot of ways different photographers work throughout the country and make an amazing living doing what they love. And then an opportunity came up to teach in a photography program at Spokane Falls Community College. And so for the last 20 plus years, I have been teaching business practices for new photographers coming out of that degree program. And so it's a little bit of my background related to the business side of photography.
That was excellent. That was a great experience. And I think that you come from a different angle that most photographers come from. So you certainly have a lot to share with the community.
It's been interesting. My father was a photographer. In fact, I grew up and he got so into photography that he ended up running a camera repair business. He was a very technical oriented guy. And if he couldn't get a part, he would manufacture it himself. So I grew up around cameras my whole life. But I realized that he never really took a business class. He just kind of lived hand to mouth. And when I was a kid, during a very important part of my life, he didn't have a camera. He actually, what did he put it? He put it on consignment. He took a loan out from a pawn shop to pay for me to be an elite athlete on a traveling team. And so I have this really interesting, I have this chapter of my life with no photos of me because my father basically borrowed against his camera equipment to pay to let me have these opportunities. And I think that when I decided, I loved photography and I got that love from my father, I decided that right then and there, I needed to focus on the business part of it. And I think that was kind of the big motivating factor in my life to really focus on what are the real success factors.
That's an amazing story. That's wonderful. I and it makes so much sense that where you've landed because of that. I came from probably the more typical story, which is I had been a hobbyist pretty much my entire life. Actually, I remember I was 8 years old and my mother handed me one of those brownie cameras, for those people who remember what a brownie camera is. And I just love photographing. And I just put it on automatic. I was probably on automatic for decades. And so for me, it was more about the composition than it was about the technical stuff. But I enjoyed it. And I did have people throughout the years say, you should make a business. You should make a business out of this. And we actually, to step back a little bit, our family moved overseas for a few years. And that was my opportunity. I quit working and we followed my husband on his job. And that was my opportunity to get back into my hobby of photography. And that's when I started to learn how to take it off automatic and start getting more creative. I'm really not technically minded. So, it was probably 5 classes I had to take before I could understand this and get this and put it into, and I had the opportunity to put it into practice. And when we moved back to the States, I was like, all right, I'm now going to take this opportunity to make it into a business. But I didn't really know anything about business. So it was going through that painful process of, I'm going to be a photographer and it's all about my art. And then just stumbling until I got the advice and started to take it to heart, which is, it's one thing to be an artist and to love photography, but if you want to make this a business, you're a business owner first and you're a photographer second. And you have to make that decision if you want to go into business, and that you should learn how to run a business as much, if not more, on how to be a photographer. And I really had to think about that. Is that truly what I want? And I actually didn't really know the answer. I just kept going and saying, well, I'm just going to keep trying this business and hopefully I'll figure it out. And then finally I got to that point, and I started taking business classes and reading lots of books. And actually, through the Professional Photographers of America, they have their business challenge. It's part of membership. It's a year-long program. So I took that in 2018 And that really was the catalyst to say, okay, I've got to keep learning about this. I had the basics down. And that really helped me to then start to focus my efforts, and the business started evolving, business started picking up. And then I started to realize I really like the business aspect. That I was really surprised. And there are times where sometimes I think I like it more than the photography. There's something a little bit like when somebody says, yeah, I love your work and I want to hire you. We want to pay this much money. And I'm like, bing, 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 bing. There's something a
Absolutely.
little addictive about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
And
this
I
is
love the
working.
contracts. I love the negotiations with the clients to make sure it's a win-win situation. Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you brought up the PPA Business Challenge. I think really the number one reason I advocate everybody join Professional Photographers of America is not to learn how to be a aesthetically better photographer, but because of all the great business resources that they have. And that's how I came across your webinar. And they provide the research on the business side of our industry at a level that the individual small business owner would have a much more difficult time gaining that aggregate knowledge. They're doing consumer research, they're doing business research, and they're able to aggregate that information and present it back to us in really helpful ways. And so that'd be one takeaway from today. Well, let's just talk a little bit about why we're doing this podcast and why it's called the Morning Hedgehog. And this idea behind this podcast is this idea that there's a Greek parable about how the fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one great thing. And the idea behind this podcast, that each episode we want to have one takeaway idea that can make a difference in your career. And I think that is really a goal that, as I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking about the fact that why is it the Morning Hedgehog? And I think for a long time now, I've recognized that what you think about first thing in the morning affects everything you do that day. And so we want to be able to provide that key business idea that you'll be able to take with you and think about throughout the day. And it's not that there's going to be one episode that's going to make all the difference in the world, but it's going to be this sort of immersion. It's kind of like if you were learning a foreign language. And for most photographers, business is a foreign language. And so through this immersion learning and through this podcast, we hope to make a difference in your life. And I know that's my goal, and I think that's been your goal. Why do you teach, for example?
Why do I teach? It's just something within me. I wish I had a better answer. I love to teach. I love to be able to help others reach their goals and their dreams. I love to be able to take a lot of different complicated subjects and help them to simplify it and help people to understand it. And what thrills me is when people walk away and say, I now know what to do, and I am excited about the possibilities. That's what I hope people get when they work with me.
And you work as a mentor for the SCORE program through the Small Business Administration, is that correct?
Yeah, I've been on hiatus for a while, but
Mm-hmm.
yes, that also has been a really fun volunteer job. I started doing that when I left Wells Fargo, and that's a group. It used to be retired professionals, but about 10-15 years ago, they've opened it up to anybody who has any kind of expertise. So here are what I know of it and my suggestions on how to use it, which is it's people who want to volunteer their time to mentor others who are starting a business or already in a business, and they just need to help. They have people who have run very successful businesses. There are people there who come from an accounting background, people who come from an attorney background, people from a marketing background, people from operations. So there's lots of different expertise. They don't do anything for you there. They're just to help guide you and mentor you. You can have as many different mentors as you want. If you can go into your local chapter, or you can do it over the phone or email across the country. I had an idea years ago, and I didn't understand anything about patents, and I was working with a SCORE mentor in Florida who was a retired patent judge. So she was fantastic and gave me all sorts of great information. I also have heard feedback from people, from some people where it was a great experience, and other people it wasn't a great experience. And so I do give out the suggestion of, it's just like anybody that you work with. If one particular mentor is not working for you, then find another mentor. You know, not everyone's going to be a great fit, but don't use that one experience to say, oh, this program doesn't work. And that saddens me. I think that there's definitely some really smart people in that group. And again, it's all out of the goodness of their heart. So just find the right mentors for you.
So that's a great idea, and that's a good takeaway for today, actually, is this idea of mentorship. And one of the interesting things about finding mentors, I think, is that sometimes it can be difficult to find mentors that are other photographers unless you're dealing with photographers outside your geographic location area, because a lot of photographers, let's face it, 80% of businesses fail in the first 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of photographers are already feeling a struggle because they may not have that business background. And so one of the things I recommend is to find mentors that are working in other industries that have the same problems. For example, jewelry stores. If I can think of a product that is definitely a want instead of a need, I would think jewelry would be one of those products that people can live without. I mean, really, diamonds are really good for saw blades if you want to get practical, but the reality is it's a luxury item.
Yes.
And yet we see a lot of successful jewelry stores, at least here in our community. We have a lot of jewelry stores that have been around for 50, 60 years. And so I like looking for business owners and fields that have some of the same challenges that I have. And when I first started out, I was completely young, fresh, no experience. I noticed, I used to go to a coffee shop, and I noticed there was this group of business owners that would get together, and I managed to exchange some cards and started taking them out for coffee. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? And I got some of the best business advice that I've ever, that I still use today by talking to these business owners. And one of the most important pieces of information I remember, I talked to a man who owned a flooring company. He sold rugs, it did flooring and drapery. So rugs, hardwood floors, tile, etc. And I said, what's the key to your success during hard economic times? And he says, as a business owner, I have to be willing to go knock on doors, door to door, and hand out my card, shake a hand, and say, I'd like your work. He says, most business owners forget to ask for the business, and they're too proud to go knock on doors. And he says, the gift for me is that I know that I can make a living at any time under any circumstances, because I know I'm willing to go knock on doors and ask for work. And I know many photographers, we live in this era where there's all this automation. Build your Squarespace site, do your e-commerce, and it's that if you build it, they will come mentality. And we do all these glitzy things, but we never ask for the work, and we never are willing to go knock on the door. So I thought that was one of the key pieces of information that I got from a mentor. What would be one piece of advice that you received early on that made a difference?
It's going back to the same thing that I said earlier, which is learn business. learn how to run a business, and it's an ongoing education. You just don't read a book or two or take a class. It is something that you are continuing to learn about. So um, my list of business books that I want to read next is quite large. So, and I don't know if you want to keep this in there, but Blinkist right now does the book summaries,
Mm-hmm.
and they're giving away a premium. So it's usually you have to pay, but you get it for free now. And you can just go in there and read a ton of business books in about 10 to 15 minutes each. So they're
Nice. I'll put
summarizing
that
it.
in the show notes. That would be great.
Yeah. And then going back to what you're saying about talking to other types of businesses, which is absolutely, and that reminds me I should do more of that. But I was going to say, to add on, also think about particular aspects of your business that you know you need to work on, and then go seek out that help. So, for instance, I was struggling last year with my workflow, and I knew I needed to fine tune that and make it faster. And I have written out all my workflow. I've got lots of different checklists. And so I sought out a mentor. I went to SCORE again, and I found a gentleman over in Atlanta, Georgia, who used to be a vice president of operations. And I don't even remember what company, but I'm like, okay, this gentleman's got operations experience. So we did a Zoom webinar, and I shared my screen and I showed him my workflows, and he was able to go through there, and he's like, cut that out, cut that out. That section can be consolidated. And the rest of it was just confirmation that I'm headed in the right direction, which made me feel great, because there's not a whole lot of information that I've been able to find on, here's a workflow for you. So I was creating, what worked for me, and I just really needed some validation. So whether it's like I need to work on improving my bookkeeping skills, or I need to work on my workflows, or whatever it is, seek out people from other industries who can help you with that.
Nice. Excellent. Well, to kind of get to where we wanted to go for this first episode, we wanted to start out just kind of describing the problems that photographers face as small business owners. What do you think is some of the critical factors that maybe impede photographers being more successful? Like you said, 80% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. What do you think in photography is some of the reasons why photographers struggle with the business side of things?
Well, I think, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. I think it's a lack of focus or a lack of direction. We're all different types of personalities. I tend to be an idea person. So that means there are more ideas swirling around of me than any 1 or 10 people could accomplish in their lifetime. So for me, it's about finding the focus, so that I can push away those ideas that aren't going to move the business forward, even though they're really exciting. But I also understand through my students and other photographers that I keep in touch with, for other people who aren't necessarily prolific idea generators, for them, it's just finding a path. They're just like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what I'm supposed to be working on next. I don't know what my priorities should be. And I think that those two different issues are very similar. It's find a path, find a direction, so that you can focus and be more effective and move forward, as opposed to just spinning around in circles.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the medium of photography inherently promotes this idea that I can point the camera at so many different things and I can make a great photo of so many different things, that, oh, well, this is a great idea, I'll go do that. Oh, I'll go do that. I'll go do that. And you lack that direction uh, because of not finding the perfect fit for who you are as an individual. And I think as we go along, one of the big hedgehog concepts in my career has been finding what really fits who you are at the core level of your being, so that the things that you need to do to be successful feel like an authentic, natural expression of who you are, as opposed to that panic and anxiety that gets induced by this idea of trying all these different things, but none of them really feel right, to where I think the number one reason people fail in business is because they go down a direction without understanding who they are at the core self, and they can only take it so far through emulating others. Maybe they're focused more on the product or the genre rather than the core who they are and what is the value proposition that they're offering. And so I think as we go along in this podcast, we're going to create this pathway for people to discover who they authentically are and build a business model around that to support it. Because when you finally understand how you're wired and you're moving in that direction, you're now in alignment with who you are, and your success will come through that moving in a solid direction. And I couldn't agree with you more about this idea of finding focus and direction.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And for people who are watching this who are just going, but I don't know, and because I know a lot of people in the beginning of their business get really stuck on that and they might give up. So just to give those people hope, it's an uh, you grow into this. You don't necessarily know it from day one. I'm still discovering this. There are things that I just do naturally that I can look back and go, oh, okay. I was already doing that. Now my job is to continue to realize and understand what that core is, and then um, expand upon it, use it more, and make my marketing and my services even that much more effective because of it. I feel like as a business owner, we grow into it. So just know that there is a process to it. It will unfold as long as you are continuing to educate yourself and think about these things and fine tune them along the way. It's going to happen.
I think that's great. And I think what you're highlighting that's so important to me is this idea that business is a creative act. It's about creativity. And your creativity is something that you nurture organically. It's not this, okay, it's step 1 through 8. It is a process. And as we go along this podcast, I think we're going to identify some key I always tell my students, I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm going to give you the questions that you need to find your answer to. Because if it was just a step-by-step, there'd be a lot of companies that were as successful as Starbucks. And yet the reality is Starbucks has something in its magic branding, its marketing, and its ethos, if you will, it gives it a unique position in the marketplace. Whether you like Starbucks, don't like Starbucks, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, it's kind of like what advertising says. We don't tell you what to think or what to choose. We just want you to make a choice. And this idea of figuring out where your unique position in the marketplace is really about this personal growth of understanding who you are before you start offering products. Because I'll give you a quick example. I do a lot of different kinds of photography, but I do it in a particular way that it doesn't really matter whether I'm doing a wedding or a portrait or a headshot. There's a way I do it. The largest wedding contract I've ever had was for a couple out of LA, flew up to Spokane to hire me. And I'm like, I don't even advertise wedding photography. Like, I don't even try to get those jobs. And I asked this bride, I said, why would you fly all the way up here to interview me and to hire me to do your wedding down in California? And they said, we do have access to all the wedding photographers you could possibly want in LA. And frankly, some of them would be even cheaper than you. We want a storyteller. We read your blog and you tell compelling stories. And we're not interested in wedding photography. We're interested in storytelling. Now, that was just an amazing validation that being consistent in my approach to understand that it's not about the wedding photography, it's about storytelling. And I bring that to all my work, regardless of the kind of photography or now video work that I'm doing as well. I just wrapped up a video project yesterday for a client.
That's super. Yes. When people, you have understand who you are, and that's where the so much more creativity comes out of you, and so much more enjoyment of what you do comes out of you. And then the people who also value that will find you, and that's where it works. We're not out there to get every piece of business. We're out there to provide a service to certain types of people who want that service and value it. And that's the beauty of being able to be in business. You don't want to work with everybody out there. You just want to work with the people who love what you do.
Your most limited resource in your career and in your life is your time. And you don't have time to pursue every opportunity. And you can't be your best by trying to be all things to all people.
Right.
And so I think as we go along, I hope people get excited about the fact that really to run a business is as creatively engaging and interesting, thinking about branding, thinking about marketing, thinking about workflows. And in our next episode, we're going to be talking about business models, and workflows is one of the 4 key ingredients of a good business model that we're going to talk about. But just to get excited about that, the creativity that got you interested in photography is the same creativity that will make you successful if you can start thinking about business as not something separate, but something that is part of the creative act of being in business. And one of the things that's really interesting about the times that we live in now is the fact that we have gone from, back in the 50s, we had mass marketing. Even before that, I think about the automobile, where Henry Ford said you could have any color you want as long as it was black. And we came out of a time where products and services were very defined into mass media, where you could, my first ad was a Yellow Page ad, which I wouldn't even bother with a Yellow Page ad today, to now consumers. We have access to consumers all over the world, and everyone's looking for something subtly different that meets their need. And as business owners, that's actually allowed us to become more and more authentic and more creative to be able to build these amazing careers. And so as we go along, I look forward to having some guests that are doing some pretty amazing things with their careers. I remember one photographer that was incredibly successful, and he was the most successful photographer nobody ever heard of. And he said, well, that's because you're not my target customer.
Yes.
And that's what we want to help people find their niche, find their special sauce that can only come from finding out who they are. And so let's end today's segment by, you brought up some books. What would be a book that you would say was one of the most influential books for you?
I know it. I'm just forgetting what the title is right now. It was actually recommended in the Professional Photographers Association Business Challenge we spoke about earlier. It's that, I know you've heard of it. A lot of people refer to it as the Bible that everybody who wants to start a small business should read. It's
Is that the E-Myth?
Yes. Thank
Yes.
you.
In fact, here's my copy of the E-Myth, and
Yes.
it's been, I've read it so many times it's worn out. Interesting story about this book. So when I first started out, I was a commercial photographer. And in fact, I didn't want to photograph anything that talked back. I focused on industrial product photography, and we'll talk more about that later on. And then I ended up in portrait photography and fell in love with it. Realized I was really a people person, not just a widget person. But then I was so into building these workflows and management because I was failing. Like my business grew, and then I moved into a retail studio where I had employees, and my business tripled the first year, and my workflow wasn't sufficient to handle it, and I got a bad reputation. Like, it takes years to build a reputation, it takes minutes to ruin it. And so I started having some real workflow issues. So it was interesting to hear you talk about your interest in workflow this last year. Well, I became obsessed with how to manage my workflow, how to prioritize the work, and how to share that work with my employees so that they didn't have to constantly wait for me. And so I ended up developing a business management software system that I used in my studio that eventually became this whole other software company business. Well, one of my clients was this incredibly successful photographer outside of Denver that I remember going to dinner with him, and I was working with his staff and setting up their system. Our software was one of the first that you network over the internet and do a lot of things. And I asked him what was the key to success, and he told me this incredible story about he didn't realize what it meant to be a business owner versus a self-employed person until he read this book.
Mm-hmm.
And then he told me another incredible story, which was the fact that he had a crisis where he just needed to go away from his business. And he told his employees that, if you want to have a job in 6 months, when I come back, you're going to have to figure it out. And what he came back to was a company that was being run better by itself than with him there, because he was a micromanager. And so he actually credits the fact that he had to get out of his own way, and he credits this book, The E-Myth, as being absolutely foundational to the transformation of his business into this amazing
That actually gave me chills. That is amazing. There's another book, I think it's by David Hilton, who I believe is a business consultant for photographers too. And his book is Spark. And it is similar. It's just a different story. It follows the story of somebody who wanted to get into construction and interior construction design. But it's the story of how this brand new business and how he evolves. And it goes a little bit more into managing people and giving the reins over to others. And like the E-Myth revisited, making sure everybody understands the purpose of the business so that they are empowered to do their part without you micromanaging.
We will be talking a lot more about this in our next episode.
Okay.
When we talk about building a business model, because there's some great information in here.
Yeah,
I'm going to offer up one more book, a personal favorite. It's a very quick, short read, or if you don't want to read it, you can go to YouTube, and I'll put a link to it. It's a very short book called Managing Oneself by probably the greatest business consultant of the 20th century, Peter Drucker. And it really talks about, he was actually predicting the era of outsourcing in the post-industrial revolution era, the information era. He was like a great prognosticator of the future of what business would look like. And he really focused on how to become empowered as an entrepreneur. And it's just a great, short, quick, but one of those powerful ideas that will really help you out. So Thank you so much, Glynns. This has been fantastic having this conversation with you. And for those of you that have been listening to us today, if you'd like to drop us a line, send us a question, a comment, all you need to do is send an email to themorninghedgehog@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, themorninghedgehog.com, and we will feature any questions that come. We'll pick out some of those questions to talk about in upcoming episodes. So thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll look for you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Morning Hedgehog podcast. For show notes or to submit a question or comment, please visit www.themorninghedgehog.com.